As the anti-Brexit loose cannon continues to career through the British constitutional settlement, taking out the legitimacy of Parliament, the impartiality of the courts, democratic principle and much else besides, as acceptable collateral damage by the political class in their treacherous determination to hand this country over lock, stock and barrel to the foreign power known as the European Union. It may be tempting for all of us, even Brexiteers, to wonder if the 2016 referendum that opened this particular Pandora's box might, after all, have been better left unopened. It might be tempting to think that saving the Conservative Party from its Eurosceptic wing wasn't really worth David Cameron's decision to promise to hold it in the first place. It might be tempting to wonder if risking the ire of 27 of our closest neighbours by telling them they don't want to be in their club was really the sensible thing to do. It might be tempting to conclude that all this strife, all this sourness, all this bad faith that has torn the country in two, not just between Leavers and Remainers, but also between the political class and the rest of us, between city and country, between London and everywhere else, between England and Wales on the one hand, and Scotland and Northern Ireland on the other, between the young and the old, between friends, families, partners, and even between fathers and daughters and mothers and sons really wasn't worth the candle. You might be tempted to think that being in the European Union really wasn't that bad, and that if we were honest about it, there are some real tangible benefits to be had from membership. It might be tempting to think that if we really hadn't insisted on making things so difficult for those in Westminster, we all might be living in a much less divided society. It might be tempting to think all these things, but it would be wrong. It would be wrong because we never wanted it in order to save the Conservative Party, even if that pudgy-faced toff Cameron did. We wanted it and relished it because it was a real chance to have a real say on a real issue, and that we would, at least for once, have a 50-50 chance in deciding the direction that this country was heading in. It would be wrong because divisions have to be aired. In a personal sense, least said, soonest mended may sometimes be the best policy. In matters of state and where great numbers, countless millions in fact, are concerned, that approach is probably the very worst imaginable. Trying to sweep difficult decisions under the mat will never work for very long. Despite the rancour and the bitterness and the name-calling and the mudslinging, this question had to be asked, and in a mature democracy, such as many of us believed ourselves to be living in, the answer must be respected. It must be respected, no matter how difficult and uncomfortable and how much it may estrange us from our European neighbours. So it would be wrong for all these reasons, but it would be most wrong, not for a negative reason, but for a positive one. It would be wrong because of the opportunity that it presents, because the Brexit vote represents an opportunity to change everything. This vote, infinitely more than a general election, has the potential to be a real game changer, a real one. The fact that our political class has twisted and turned and contorted themselves in every which way in order to undermine, delegitimise and ultimately overturn the result illustrates the tailspin that our elite is currently in. They are panicking. Despite their claims to be defending democracy, which nobody outside of Parliament, the media or the legal profession believes, and which the rest of us can see right through, make no mistake, these people are on the run, and they know it. They may seem to be still be in charge, since they remain in charge of their little bubble, the Houses of Parliament, but they know that their day of reckoning is coming. The reason they're taking such refuge in that mock Gothic palace in Southwest 1 is that is the only place anywhere where they can tell themselves that they are right and have their contorted opinions backed up by the equally deluded co-conspirators and broadcast by the complicit Remain media. Because when they voted leave, the British electorate fired a missile through their false consensus. That missile has caused considerable damage, and it is yet to explode, but the timer has not yet run down. It has breached the outer defences of the elite, and they are shitting themselves. They know that when the timer stops, and they can hear it ticking, that everything will change. Because this is the nature of, and the opportunity of, Brexit. Once a general election comes, and it will come before or after the 31st of October, there is every reason to believe that half of all MPs will be voted out, and the Commons will reflect the genuine Leave-Remain split. If it does, we should have a Leave alliance of over 400 seats. Brexit will follow in short order. After 46 years, we will leave the European Union. And that's a prize in itself. Even if nothing else were to happen, that would still be a prize worth having. To some it is the only prize, such as their opposition to the entire institution of the EU. But there's no reason why it should stop there. Having gained control of the House of Commons, reform of the House of Lords can begin. As it happens, reform of the Lords would not be uppermost in my mind, since there have been numerous occasions when it has only been the Lords that have stood in the way of draconian legislation from the Commons. But in the new post-Brexit paradigm, the majority view must prevail. I will argue and advocate for the legitimacy of the Lords, but if it is to be abolished, then so be it. Questions can then be asked about the monarchy. Again, although I feel if there ever was a time that the Queen should have intervened, it would have been to support the people over Parliament. I would support the continuation of the monarchy, if only because of its tremendous economic value, since by all accounts it brings in many times what it costs. But the real fun starts at the Home Office, with new democratically accountable ministers at the helm and free from the dictates of the European Union. Immigration, that many-headed, out-of-control non-policy, can be properly cut down to size. Net immigration of less than 10,000 per year is a real possibility. In fact, if it was that low, and consistently that low, when a humanitarian crisis reared its ugly head, we could afford to be magnanimous, generous and compassionate, and offer a real refuge to obvious and genuine refugees, rather than being a soft touch for middle-class economic migrants. But there must first be a paradigm shift to a sub 10,000 per year level of net immigration. Then there is all sorts of sanity to be reintroduced in areas like criminal justice, prisons and the police, to name but a few. One of the first things were to be place freedom of speech, the single most important aspect of a free society, back where it should be, at front, centre and inviolable. Hate speech laws must be repealed as a matter of urgency. A free society cannot function whilst its speech, its very means of communication, and its ability to express dissent is impeded. Every citizen in the country must have this right. None must be denied it, nor, just as importantly, be protected from it. Police resources can then be directed to combating child gang rape, knife crime and terrorism, where they should be. The reported 900 or so officers in the Metropolitan Police concerned with hate crime can be given other duties relating to these issues just mentioned. In addition, the police forces of the UK must be brought back to first principles, namely that the law is to be applied equally, without fear or favour, as per Robert Peel's original 9 principles. No consideration at all is to be given to cultural sensibilities. As a priority, the police must patrol so-called Sharia areas and police them in accordance with the laws of the United Kingdom. The police must enforce the law, without exception. To achieve this, all senior police officers who have allowed this culture This culture of partisan vindictiveness in the case of so-called hate crimes, whilst at the same time fostering a permissiveness of serious crimes against the person, in particular against children, must be culled. If that means decapitating all chief constables and their department heads in favour of officers less contaminated by this politically correct ethos, then so be it. Because the only good dead wood is dead wood. The same goes for the prison service. Prisons are primarily there to keep the rest of us, the law-abiding, safe. This the prison service does relatively effectively. However, incarceration is but one aspect of the nation's prisons. It makes no sense for young men to go into prison as petty criminals and emerge 12 months later as hate-filled, belligerent, hardened and fanatical Islamist terrorists. The Muslim prison gangs must be broken up and dispersed, and their access to imams dependent on good behaviour and never in secret. If that necessitates the release of some other less serious criminals, then so be it. Much more prison officers must be recruited, trained and above all paid well to ensure retention. Like the police force, it must be rejuvenated as a career choice, and it must gain the respect and above all the trust of the public. There will also be much work to do in the Ministry of Defence. The armed forces, also of a matter of urgency, must be reminded of their primary duty, the defence of the United Kingdom and its colonies. Its secondary duty, that as a founding member of the UK's most important alliance, NATO, must also be reaffirmed. The UK's armed forces can and must be ready and willing to come to the aid of its allies in the Commonwealth as a supplementary duty where it has been invited and where it can do the most good. The armed forces must be adequately funded and must be allowed to adopt policies that maximise its effectiveness rather than those that satisfy a short-term political goal. Idiotic pronouncements such as servicemen expressing patriotic sentiments being monitored for signs of far-right sympathies are to be met head-on. Patriotism should be considered a prerequisite for servicemen and women, not something to be treated with suspicion. Pressure groups such as the Muslim Council of Britain are entitled to their opinions, but should not be the driver of policy in the forces, as in the recent case of the activist known as Tommy Robinson. Even in the Department of Education, a vast and sprawling department dripping with the ethos of political correctness and ridiculously discredited anti-Western far-left ideology, there is also a real prize to be had. The maverick iconoclastic head of the Michaela School in an inner-city London borough, one Catherine Barblesing, has, it seems, managed to reverse half a century of falling academic standards in just 5 short years in one of the most deprived areas of the country. Her free school, free in the sense of being independent from the local authority, in this case the solidly Labour constituency of Brent, has just truly outstanding results in GCSEs and far in excess of any expectations. Her policy of tough love, discipline and an absolute intolerance of misbehaviour has, by these results, totally demolished the prevailing wisdom of decades. A populist new broom Minister for Education would have the power to encourage and harness Barblesing's new ethos, to equip our children for new outward-looking Britain after Brexit. But it is in the field of restorative justice that the greatest prize awaits. The child rape gangs of Rotherham, Rochdale, Oxford, Newcastle, Telford, Bristol and now Huddersfield are finally, after decades of the authorities looking the other way, at last being brought to justice. To say that this is to be welcomed would be somewhat of an understatement. It is vital that those thousands upon thousands of girls and young women get the justice that they deserve. The toleration of the rape gangs is the greatest social scandal in Britain since slavery. But the prosecution of the actual perpetrators is but the first step in delivering the justice that is crucial to a society that can have any claim at all to be civilised. What is required now are crusading investigators that will stop at nothing and leave no stone unturned in their quest to discover who knew that this was going on, who ignored it, who tolerated it, who allowed it to continue, who else might have been involved in it, and who covered it up. In the frame will be social workers, local government officials, police officers and members of local media that refused to act when their reporters alerted them to the facts, as well as and including people like former Home Secretaries and Prime Ministers. Their crimes must be uncovered. There must be no statute of limitations, no hiding place for those who, perhaps for the sake of their pensions, or those who might have courted the ethnic vote, could have done something and didn't. A new broom could do this, a new broom uncontaminated by previous affiliations, a new broom elected on a Brexit ticket with a mission to change everything. Because as I've said before, the opportunity of Brexit is the opportunity to change everything. It really is. We just have to grasp it. And that means that Brexit must be forced over the line, and it must be a real Brexit rather than a warmed up Theresa May surrender deal. Boris may well be the man for the job, but then, as everybody knows, what Boris cares most about is Alexander Boris the Pfeffel Johnson. If he thinks he can get away with selling us a crap deal, he will. It must be made clear to him, crystal clear, that only a real Brexit will do. It's the only one that we can trust. So we must begin to think about Brexit over the long haul. If we don't get it this time, and we may not, we must be even more determined to get it next time. The political class will throw all kinds of obstacles in our way. They are at present, for instance, in a frantic rush to hand over our military to the EU. Despite what they may say publicly, they are in full panic mode and are desperately trying to force the Brexit genie back into the bottle. They will sign all sorts of treaties that they will say are impossible to revoke. But we must not be deflected. The political class, which includes Parliament, are only there because we allow them to be. They gain their legitimacy from us. It is always within our power to rescind that legitimacy. They can continue to play their stupid and treacherous games and try to block Brexit, refuse us the chance to vote them out in a general election, and even try to get the law on their side. They can play those little games for a while. But the reckoning is coming. The reckoning is coming partly out of a sense of righteous anger, partly out of a sense of determination that our vote, despite everything, will matter, and partly out of a sense of certainty that, despite being ignored, and as well as being despised, this country still belongs to us. But it's also coming because of the prize that good men can, when given the tools, still do good things. And that, I reckon, is a prize worth fighting for.